Imagine being laughed at just for doing your job, mocked for your clothes, insulted by your boss, treated like you're invisible. That's exactly what happened to Clara Johnson, a cleaning lady who everyone thought was powerless. But what no one knew was that Clara carried a secret that would shake the entire company to its core. Stay tuned, because this story will leave you speechless. Look at her shoes. Probably older than this building, one employee whispered, his laughter bouncing off the marble walls of the glittering lobby. Heads turned instantly. All eyes landed on Clara Johnson, a middle-aged black woman quietly pushing her squeaky cleaning cart through the tall glass doors of Hamilton and Crest corporate towers. The lobby itself was a display of wealth, golden chandeliers dangling from the ceiling, expensive artwork lining the walls, and polished floors so reflective that Clara could see the outlines of her tired face in them. For over 10 years, Clara had been the unseen force behind this spotless building. She scrubbed bathrooms long after everyone had gone home, emptied trash cans full of papers no one wanted, and polished desks that would be smudged with fingerprints again the very next day. She was the invisible guardian of cleanliness, yet nobody ever stopped to thank her. But today felt different, painfully different. Due to scheduling changes, Clara was forced to work in the daytime. Suddenly, she wasn't invisible anymore. She was on display. And the very people she had quietly served were mocking her out loud. "She probably doesn't even know how to turn on a computer," one young intern sneered, leaning on the reception desk with a smirk. "Don't get too close," another added, covering his nose dramatically. "She might smear you with bleach." A ripple of laughter filled the air. It wasn't just one or two voices, it was a group, and every chuckle seemed to stab at Clara's pride. Clara lowered her gaze to the floor and kept moving, pretending she didn't hear them. She dipped her rag into the spray bottle and began wiping down the spotless glass doors, humming softly to herself. It was the only way to drown out the noise. But deep down, her chest ached. Clara wasn't just some cleaning lady with a rag and a cart. She was a mother, a widow, a survivor. She had raised 2 children all on her own after her husband's sudden passing. She had worked double shifts to put food on the table. She had walked home in the rain when she couldn't afford the bus fare. She had endured back pain, exhaustion, and silent tears, yet she never gave up. She had lived through things most of these fresh-faced office workers couldn't even imagine. And still, to them, she was nothing more than the janitor. "Hey," one of the employees called out, pointing at a streak on the window Clara had just cleaned. "Missed a spot. Want me to show you how it's done?" The group broke out in fresh laughter. Clara's hand froze on the glass. Her knuckles whitened around the rag. She wanted to snap back, to tell them she wasn't their joke, but she took a deep breath instead. She had learned long ago that dignity didn't come from shouting back. It came from patience, and from knowing something others didn't. And Clara did know something they didn't. As the laughter echoed in the lobby, Clara allowed herself the faintest of smiles. Hidden behind her quiet demeanor was a truth no one in that building suspected. These young interns, these arrogant employees, even their powerful boss, none of them knew who Clara Johnson truly was. They only saw a woman in a faded uniform and worn shoes. But under that uniform was a sharp mind, a plan years in the making, and a power that would soon shake the very foundation of Hamilton and Crest. If only they knew. Because the woman they mocked for cleaning floors was destined to do far more than scrub their messes. She carried a secret, one that would soon turn the entire company upside down. And in time, every single one of them would learn the hard way: never underestimate the cleaning lady. By noon, Clara's humiliation had only grown heavier. The whispers hadn't stopped, in fact, they'd multiplied. Every time she walked past a group of employees, voices lowered and chuckles followed. Some pretended to gag dramatically when she passed with her mop bucket, others wrinkled their noses as if cleanliness itself carried a smell. Still, Clara pressed on. She wiped, she scrubbed, she polished, pretending not to hear. But inside, her patience was wearing thin. Then, everything shifted when Richard Hamilton appeared. Richard was the CEO of Hamilton and Crest, a tall, broad-shouldered man with slicked-back silver hair and an arrogance that seemed to precede him into every room. His suits were custom-tailored, his shoes polished like mirrors, and his cologne so strong it filled the air long after he passed. The employees straightened as soon as they saw him. Some greeted him nervously, others smiled too wide, hoping to be noticed. Richard loved this attention, it fed him like oxygen. But then, his sharp blue eyes landed on Clara. She was on her knees, scrubbing the gum from underneath the front reception desk. Sweat dampened her forehead, and her uniform, though clean, looked faded against the gleaming corporate lobby. Richard paused, his lip curling into a cruel smile. "Well, isn't this a picture?" he said loudly enough for the entire room to hear. The mighty Hamilton and Crest lobby, brought down to its knees by a janitor. The employees laughed instantly, eager to please their boss. Clara froze in place, rag in hand. Her heart thudded in her chest, but she refused to look up. Richard stepped closer, towering over her. "Pathetic," he muttered with a smirk. Then, in a louder voice, he added, "This is exactly why people like her stay where they belong. On the floor." The room erupted in cruel laughter once again. Some covered their mouths, others laughed openly. Clara clenched her jaw. Every word stung like a slap. Richard wasn't finished. He leaned down slightly, his voice dripping with condescension. "Listen, sweetheart. Don't ever dream too big. Some people are born for boardrooms, and some are born for brooms. Know your place." The employees howled with laughter at the line. Some even clapped as if Richard had just told a brilliant joke. Clara's eyes finally lifted. She looked straight at Richard, calm, steady, unshaken. For a brief second, the CEO faltered under her gaze. There was something in her eyes he couldn't quite place. Strength? Defiance? "Be careful how you treat people, Mr. Hamilton," she said quietly but firmly. "Tables have a way of turning." The words cut through the laughter, silencing the room for just a moment. A few employees glanced at each other, uneasy. But Richard threw his head back and laughed. "Did you hear that?" he mocked. "The cleaning lady thinks she's in some kind of fairy tale." He waved her off like she was nothing more than dust on his sleeve. "Go back to your mops, sweetheart. Leave the business to the grown-ups." More laughter. More humiliation. Clara's cheeks burned, but her eyes never left Richard's. She didn't flinch. She didn't back down. Instead, she stood slowly, placed her rag back in her cart, and said nothing more. She pushed her cart down the hall, humming softly once again, her face unreadable. The employees whispered behind her, mocking her words. "Tables can turn? What's that supposed to mean? She's probably been watching too many movies. Honestly, it's kind of funny she thinks she matters." But Clara knew better. She had learned long ago that when powerful men laughed at you, it usually meant they had no idea what was coming. And Richard Hamilton, for all his arrogance and cruelty, had just set himself up for the fall of his lifetime. The cruel laughter of that day would soon be replaced by stunned silence. Because Clara's quiet warning wasn't just a response, it was a promise. The next morning, the office buzzed with its usual rhythm. Phones rang, keyboards clattered, and the smell of fresh coffee filled the air. Employees shuffled in, gossiping about deadlines, new projects, and of course, Clara's humiliation from the day before. "I still can't get over it," one intern whispered at the elevator. "Did you hear what Mr. Hamilton said to her?" "Classic." Another chuckled. "She should be grateful she even has a job here." But while the employees laughed, they had no idea that this day would mark the beginning of a storm none of them saw coming. Because Clara didn't walk through the doors in her faded uniform that morning. Instead, she entered the building dressed in a sharp black suit. Her hair was neatly styled, her steps confident, and in her hand she carried not a mop, but a sleek leather briefcase. The lobby froze. "Wait, is that her?" one woman whispered. "No way," another muttered. "That can't be the same cleaning lady." "It is," someone else confirmed, eyes wide. "That's Clara, but she looks different. The same employees who had mocked her the day before now stared in stunned silence. The ragged janitor had transformed into someone they barely recognized. Clara didn't acknowledge the stares. She walked straight to the elevators, pressed the button, and stepped in as if she had done it 1,000 times before. Her destination, the boardroom. When she entered, the executives were already gathered around the long oak table. Suits, ties, laptops, and coffee cups filled the room. At the head sat Richard Hamilton, flipping through a stack of reports with his usual smugness. The moment he saw her, his face twisted in irritation. "What on earth is she doing here?" Richard barked. "This isn't the janitor's closet, sweetheart. You're lost." The board members chuckled under their breath, assuming Clara had wandered in by mistake. But Clara said nothing. She calmly set her briefcase on the table, opened it, and pulled out a thick stack of documents bound neatly with clips. Her voice was steady, strong, and commanding. "Actually, Mr. Hamilton, I'm exactly where I need to be. Allow me to introduce myself properly. My name is Clara Johnson, and as of this week, I am the majority shareholder of Hamilton and Crest." The room went silent. One executive dropped his pen. Another nearly spilled his coffee. The chuckles stopped instantly as Clara slid the documents across the table for the board members to review. Richard's face turned red. "What nonsense is this?" he snapped, grabbing the papers. But as his eyes scanned the pages, his expression shifted from anger to shock. The papers didn't lie. Clara had quietly bought up company stock for years. She owned more shares than anyone else in the room, including him. Clara continued, her tone calm but firm. "After my husband passed away a decade ago, I received a settlement from his business partner. Instead of wasting it, I invested. I watched this company carefully, bought shares whenever the price dropped, and held on to them. While you were busy flaunting power, I was quietly building mine. And now, I own controlling interest." Gasps filled the room. Richard slammed the papers on the table. "This is a joke. A janitor can't own Hamilton and Crest." Clara's eyes locked on his. "I wasn't just a janitor, Richard. I was a strategist. I did what you never expected, I paid attention. And now, this janitor controls your future." The silence was deafening. The executives leaned back in their chairs, whispering to each other, unsure of what to say. Clara, the woman they mocked for years, had just turned their entire world upside down. And Richard Hamilton, the man who had humiliated her in front of everyone, was about to learn what it meant when the tables truly turned. The boardroom was suffocatingly quiet. The executives flipped through Clara's documents again and again, their brows furrowed, their voices low with disbelief. The reality sank in, this wasn't some mistake. Clara truly owned the majority of Hamilton and Crest. Richard Hamilton, however, refused to accept it. His fists slammed the oak table, rattling the coffee cups. "This is absurd," he roared, his face flushed crimson. "I built this company from the ground up. I made it what it is today. And I'll be damned if some cleaning lady thinks she can waltz in here and take it from me." Clara didn't flinch. She stood calmly at the opposite end of the table, her presence commanding despite the storm raging from Richard's side. Her voice, measured and steady, cut through the tension. "You may have founded this company, Mr. Hamilton. But leadership is not about who starts, it's about who sustains. And while you've been humiliating your employees, cutting corners, and pocketing bonuses, I've been watching. I've been preparing. And now, I have the power to make a change." The board members shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at Richard, others at Clara, their loyalties already starting to waver. Richard sneered, pointing at her with trembling fingers. "Change? Don't make me laugh. You scrub floors. You don't know the first thing about running a billion-dollar corporation." Clara finally walked forward, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She stopped right in front of him, her gaze unwavering. "You're wrong, Richard. I know more about this company than you ever cared to. While I cleaned these halls, I listened. I heard how employees complained about your reckless decisions, how clients questioned your arrogance, how workers feared losing their jobs because of your greed. This company doesn't need you anymore. It needs dignity. It needs respect. And it needs leadership. Gasps filled the room. One executive whispered to another, "She's right, morale has been awful under Richard." Richard's face twisted with rage. "You think you can replace me? I am Hamilton and Crest." Clara straightened her shoulders, her voice ringing with finality. "Not anymore. Effective immediately, you are terminated." The words hit like a thunderclap. The room fell utterly silent. The employees outside, who had gathered near the glass walls to watch the drama unfold, pressed closer, eyes wide in shock. Richard's jaw dropped. You can't fire me." His voice cracked, his arrogance faltering for the first time. "I built this empire. I earned this seat." Clara leaned closer, her eyes piercing his. "No, Richard. The employees built this empire. The janitors, the assistants, the accountants, the clerks, every person you dismissed as unimportant. Without them, your so-called empire collapses. Without respect, leadership is nothing." Her words hit harder than any slap could. Security entered the room, summoned discreetly by the board secretary who had been watching with bated breath. For the first time in his career, Richard Hamilton realized he had no power here. The guards, men who had once jumped at his orders, now stood by Clara's side, awaiting her command. "Escort Mr. Hamilton from the building," Clara instructed calmly. "No. This is my company." Richard screamed, his voice echoing as the guards took hold of his arms. "You'll regret this, Clara. You'll all regret this." But his words fell flat. The employees outside didn't look at him with fear anymore, they looked at Clara with awe. Some even clapped quietly as Richard was dragged toward the elevators. The mighty CEO who once ruled the building with arrogance was gone, defeated not by another tycoon, but by the very woman he had mocked. Clara stood tall, breathing deeply. She didn't smile, she didn't gloat. She simply adjusted her suit jacket and turned back to the board. "Now," she said with calm authority, "let's talk about building a company where every worker is treated with respect." The board members nodded slowly, almost reverently. For the first time in years, Hamilton and Crest felt less like a cold corporate empire and more like a place of possibility. And Clara Johnson, the woman they once dismissed as a janitor, had become its new leader. The news spread faster than wildfire. By the next morning, headlines across the city read, "Cleaning lady becomes CEO overnight. Janitor ousts arrogant boss in stunning corporate coup. Clara Johnson, from mop bucket to boardroom." Social media exploded with her story. Some called it the ultimate revenge, others called it justice long overdue. But for Clara, it wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity, something she had been denied for far too long. Inside Hamilton and Crest, the atmosphere changed almost instantly. Gone was the fear that used to linger in the hallways whenever Richard Hamilton walked by. In its place grew a sense of respect, even hope. Clara didn't waste time sitting on a throne. Instead of locking herself away in a corner office, she walked the floors. She shook hands with receptionists, listened to security guards, and even joined the cafeteria staff for lunch. She spoke to interns, asking about their dreams, reminding them they were more than just coffee carriers or note-takers. She introduced new policies, fair wages, better benefits, scholarships for employees' children, and training programs to help lower-level workers rise through the ranks. For the first time, the employees felt seen, not just as cogs in a machine, but as people. One afternoon, as Clara passed through the lobby, she noticed the same young intern who had mocked her shoes weeks before. He stood awkwardly, shifting from foot to foot before approaching her. "Miss Johnson," he stammered, I just wanted to say. I'm sorry. For the way I treated you. I was wrong." Clara studied him for a moment, then smiled warmly. "What matters isn't the mistake you made," she said softly. What matters is whether you grow from it. Learn to treat people with respect, no matter who they are. That lesson will take you farther than any business degree." The intern nodded, his eyes shining with gratitude. Clara turned and continued walking, her head high. The same lobby that had once echoed with cruel laughter now rang with respect. Her journey had proven one truth: never underestimate the people you overlook. Because sometimes, the person pushing the cleaning cart might just be the one holding the keys to the kingdom. And just like that, the woman they mocked for scrubbing floors became the one signing their paychecks. Clara's story reminds us never to underestimate anyone, because respect is worth more than power. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more inspiring stories, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss what happens next.